There was a bit of a tiff within the MAGA coalition last month over H-1B visas. The tech bros like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, may he rest in peace, on one side were arguing that we simply don't have enough skilled workers in America to fill the tech jobs, so we need H-1B visas to fill those gaps with well-compensated foreigners coming here for those jobs. And by well compensated, I'm just trying to say that their argument is that they are not cheap labor necessarily. But on the other side of the argument are the America First protectionists who believe that H-1B visas are a way to artificially keep American tech wages lower, or worse, just keep Americans out of those jobs. So in this episode, I'll talk to two guests who recently wrote a piece for Real Clear Markets titled "Now's the Time to Embrace Skilled Immigration" about the H-1B visa program. And I bet you can guess which side of the argument they're on. Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie, so that you don't necessarily have to be, but you can be. It's totally fine with me. Thanks for joining me for a little bit of your valuable time. My guests today are Lura Forcum and Gabriel Nadales. Lura is president of the Independent Center. She has a PhD in consumer psychology and spent 7 years as a professor at Clemson University before returning to the world of public policy, marketing, and communications. Gabriel is a free speech activist and author of Behind the Black Mask: My Time as an Antifa Activist. As a former far-left activist with the anti-fascist movement, Gabriel has spoken to over 100 college campuses to warn students against political extremism, violence, censorship, and critical race theory. And I would love to actually have him back on sometime to talk about that transition from Antifa to conservative. As mentioned, they recently wrote an article for Real Clear Markets supporting the H-1B visa program. So let's get to my conversation with them. All right. Thank you both for joining me on this episode. We're talking about H-1B visas. And the joke I like to say about H-1B visas is H-1B is not the new bird flu that's floating around right now. It's I don't know. I guess the first question is, what are H-1B visas, and do we know why they're called that? Do we have any idea? Is that just a number and letter that we assign to it, or does it mean something?
You know, the H-1B visas, like immigration, a lot of the forms, they're all different. I mean, I'm an immigrant myself, so I filled out several different forms. The last one that I remember filling out, I believe, is what is it? The first one's I-130, and then it is US 485. I can't remember. Point being, no, it's 6600. N600, that's the naturalization one. They all have these little numbers, they're numerical codes. I'm not 100% sure if they all have any meaning. The one that I do know they do try to put meaning is S visas, which is called a snitch visa, because you typically have to have somebody be testifying against somebody in order to get that visa. But I don't know if that's kind of after the fact or what. But yeah, they're just a way for them to organize their things, I think.
Yeah,
I didn't know we had such a visa. That's fantastic.
I had no idea.
I'm not an expert in immigration, but having gone through that process, which takes an incredibly long time, I can tell you that it's just really complicated. There's so many things about it.
Yeah. So the main thing about H-1B is that it's for people who are highly skilled working in the STEM industry or in STEM fields. And it's a 3-year visa. It has to be renewed. It requires a sponsoring employer. It requires a bachelor's degree. And there's a cap. So it's actually this very constrained program for admitting skilled immigrants to do specific jobs.
And obviously right now we are having a conversation about that. Or I say we're having a conversation. It's mostly happening, I guess, on Twitter. And there's some infighting between the MAGA crowds of, do we want more H-1B visas? Do we want fewer H-1B visas? Do we want to get rid of it entirely? There's kind of all these things that are getting jumped around. So what's the original intent? I mean, we mentioned that it's for high skilled kind of stuff. Was this filling a hole in the workforce that we didn't have, or was this just, what was the original intent of H-1B visas, I suppose?
I think it's to fill a gap for skilled employees. And, the main reason to look at expanding that program now is because we have this growing gap for skilled jobs. Specifically, the gap is estimated to be 85 million workers by the year 2030. So it's a massive gap. And these also, because these are skilled and highly educated workers, we know they're contributing a lot to the U.S. economy. They They start businesses. They create intellectual property for employers. They just add a lot to our economy. So I understand that there are concerns about the ramifications for American workers, but there's clearly a lot that they add as well, not just economically, but of course culturally as well. And they're really talented, educated people.
Okay, so on the left and the right, we're having this argument about whether these should be expanded, whether they should be eliminated. And I think the most common things that I'm seeing is that some people on the left are saying we should get rid of them because this is exploiting these visa holders, these are exploiting foreign workers by either paying them less or forcing them to be chained to a job that they don't really want and can't really leave, and they don't really have any bargaining power there. And on the right, we're just hearing, I think more so what we're hearing is, it feels like on the right is, oh, this is hurting Americans that can't have that jobs or those specific jobs. What are the arguments, I guess, against both of those things that you all would say?
Well, for the first one, I keep thinking about the fact that a lot of these people, they're specialized skills. These are typically engineers. They're making much more money than I am. You know, they're making the six figures kind of thing, 150, 70, 170,000. It really varies, but they're definitely making a lot of money. So I would never say that it's indentured service. Now, there is an argument to be said that the fact that these people can leave their jobs, for a while, but I mean that's a contract. You know, there's American workers that they sign a contract that they have specific provisions that you have to work for this thing. It's not something that is being exploitative of like immigrants. That's just basic contracts. Every contract has its own rules and regulations, and everybody who applies to this adheres to the laws. You know, if they were really indentured service, well, they wouldn't apply if the terms were really that bad. Now, as far as some of the arguments on the right, I definitely get why people want to protect American workers, but one of these things, it's always that I'm forgetting the name of the fallacy, the pie fallacy. What is it called?
Mm-hmm. Like the zero sum thinking.
Zero sum thinking. Yeah, zero sum. You know, just because. It's not that these immigrants are taking a job and then there's no jobs for Americans. What ends up happening is they just make the pie bigger because a lot of these people are creating a lot of jobs. And in fact, this is something that Laura and I wrote in our op-ed, is that 44% of the 2023 Fortune 500 country or companies were founded by immigrants. You know, this is creating high-level positions that would not be available for many American citizens. So, if anything, it's creating more jobs for Americans, especially those in specialized skills, not fewer.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. That was an interesting stat that stood out to me. It was 44% of either immigrants or their children, right, that have started. Mm-hmm. That's an incredible statistic, obviously, and it's obvious that this is not people working on farms like picking oranges. This is much higher skill kind of stuff. Now, there's some discrepancies, I think, on some of that skill stuff because, I mean, STEM salaries have kind of not risen at the rate that some other things have. So some people would say that we have too many potential people. I'm curious do you think there's a problem at all between like the college education factor on some of this stuff? Because like, for example, before I did this, I worked in e-commerce kind of stuff, like website development. I'm not a developer. I just kind of manage projects, but some of the best coders I've ever met in my life have zero college degree that's attached to them. So do you all think that that's a potential change that could be a good thing to say that, because I know we're chaining this to, often, like I think 20% of them are reserved for advanced degrees, right? Is that, I think that's right.
There's a cap of 20,000 advanced degrees. And this is 65,000 visas annually. So we're not talking about really extraordinary numbers of these immigrants coming into the United States in the first place.
Yeah, it's a very small number compared to the United States workforce.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a shortfall in terms of the workers that we're training in the U.S. in STEM fields. So I think if there's concern about, you know, about the availability of these jobs, like we can look at increasing STEM training, but that's going to take some time. We're talking about having a 10 to 15 year education process. So this is not an overnight solution. And we need these workers in the meantime. This is a significant gap that we're talking about. The other thing that's contributing to the gap is a declining birth rate. So that's another thing that's very tricky to address. I don't know if we know how to address that.
Right, because I think that's probably the biggest problem that we're potentially facing, is that Americans are just not having the amount of kids that it takes to replace the workforce that's about to retire. With boomers, okay. That's why that 2030 number exists, right? Is because all of the people that are in their 60s right now are potentially retiring from those fields, and we don't have a workforce that can replace them one-to-one right now. So yeah. I wonder if I know, and part of the money, right, that the companies pay goes to educating American workers, right? That's part of the deal, I think, with the funding of the fees they have to pay. I think that's something I read, and I'll have to look that up to make sure that's correct. But so we're obviously trying to work on that problem, but you're right. It's like a multi-decade lead up. And I think the post-COVID education kind of wake up in America has shown us that we're frankly not educating our kids to the level that, a lot of these H-1B visa holders, I know there are caps on it, but a lot of them are from India, right? Mm-hmm. Where they're just absolutely educating the crap out of their kids if they can manage to do so, to get a better opportunity. So how do you think we combine, do you think that cap should go up? It's 85,000 or whatever a year total right now. Do you all think that should go higher?
I would say yes, it should absolutely go higher. But I think the bigger issue here is that we have an immigration policy. Just overall, the policy is super politicized. It's ineffective. And I think what voters are telling their elected officials is hey, could you do something proactive instead of reactive? The policy conversation that we're having is not a proactive one that's focused on economic growth. It's focused on hey, these guys are going to take my job.
I think the problem with that, though, that I have found is that politicians have to get elected next year and rarely are looking 10 years down the road, because that's not the concern at that point. The concern is I have to get reelected next year. And therefore, especially in the House, it's every 2 years. And so I think that the problem is we keep trading in, part-time Band-Aid kind of things, because that's what people can run on. And no one's really looking. Frankly, I'm not sure that anyone's looking 2 years down the road. It feels like. Do you all? What are the ways that you think Congress is being short-sighted about immigration specifically? Whether it's H-1B visa stuff or just how we create the workforce we need in general. Are there other ways that you think they're being specifically short-sighted?
Immigration is just a complete mess. I think that one of the reasons why the H-1B visa became kind of like a flash focus on this was because of Vivek
Ramaswamy.
Ramaswamy. That's kind of what sparked this conversation. But I think that H-1B visas is just an example of why there's immigrants can provide such a great benefit to America. But overall, there's a lot of caps on. And one of the things that people don't realize is that the wait to come to America actually varies according to what country you're from.
Right.
And that is something that I think should definitely be looked at. I think for Mexico, I think it's 25 years. If you're from Canada, I think it might be 5 years for just your regular visas or different types of things. So I think one of the problems is that, unfortunately, America makes it a little bit too difficult to come here. I remember when I was working about 10 years ago, I was a, what do they call it? They call it swamper. I don't really know if that's a word, but that's what they call them. Basically, I was the driver's assistant, and we would go deliver bleach and chemicals to pools, supplies, or whatever. There was this guy, older gentleman. He told me that before some of the immigration crackdowns of the 80s, he used to live in Tijuana, and he used to come in and out and all the time. But as soon as it started kind of making it more difficult, he decided to stay here in America because he thought that it was going to be more difficult for him. He became a U.S. citizen and all that. He did everything legally. But the more restrictions that you put on this, the more you actually get illegal immigration, and then you get people who are stuck here. I know that there's plenty of immigrants here in America who are eligible to become U.S. citizens, but due to, say, like a 10-year ban, as soon as the moment that they walk out of the country, they're banned permanently. It makes it very difficult for them to become U.S. citizens. And I mean, and that's just a whole mess. Overall, I think that what America needs and what the American workforce needs is more immigration. But at the same time, one of the problems that we've had, unfortunately, from the left is the fact that they just say that should be without any restrictions. And for me personally, I think that your restrictions can be very minimal. If you have a severe criminal record of like, and I'm not talking about maybe like, say you ran a parking ticket or something from like 10 years ago, but if you have a history of they call them in immigration crimes of moral turpitude, you stole, you were a robber, you know, those are the people that we don't want. And I think that's really where the focus needs to be when it comes to immigration policy. You enforce the laws against criminals or people who really shouldn't be there, and then you have a conversation about the pros and cons of immigration in general.
Yeah. If you focus on a policy that is both humane and economically beneficial, but is just addressing the overall problems, I think that's the real gap here. And I think there are a lot of different ways to do it. But the problem is it's so incredibly politicized, and the time frame is just such a short window, right? Like if you have a year focus or a 2-year focus, we're not talking about modernizing the system so that it maximizes being economically beneficial, but also being humane at the same time. And I think what Gabriel is talking about is, you know, some of these policies have unintended consequences. And I do wonder if people, you know, advocating for extremely restrictive immigration policies, they probably wouldn't guess that like one of the outcomes of that is, oh, I'm not sure I can get back and forth, so I'm just going to stay. Right? Like that's surprising. And I bet it's not uncommon.
That is something I say all the time, is that every policy has trade-offs, every single one of them. There is no such thing as a policy that doesn't have some sort of trade-off. And most of them have unintended consequences because we just haven't thought out how are people going to react in their best interest to this regulation or law or whatever it is. What do we think the trade-offs are right now for H-1B visas, if there are? I mean, like I said, I think there are trade-offs to everything. Is it just those things that we're seeing at the margins from the left and right complaining about, oh, this is taking an American's job, or, oh, this is someone that maybe is getting paid less than they would if they were not an H-1B visa holder from another country? Are there trade-offs that you all see that need to be worked on?
I mean, obviously, if a job is going in the short term, if a job is going to a foreign person who is part of an H-1B visa, the trade-off is that an American may not get that position in the first place, or maybe a green card holder or something. That's an immediate trade-off that somebody you could definitely see. But again, it's about looking at things from like the immediate, what's happening right now, to like on the long term. And that trade-off to me is not really that significant when you look at what ends up happening with a lot of these H-1B visas individuals. As we mentioned, many of them create jobs. Many of them end up helping the American economy. But in the short term, I can definitely see why there's people who are a little bit abrasive to these types of policies, because what they see is like, well, I applied for this job, but it seems like they're just hiring people from abroad instead of like considering American workers.
I know they're anecdotes for sure. I've read, you get in the comics section of an article on something like this, and you're going to have people that go, look, I work in tech. It is so hard to find qualified people, specifically with a lot of coding stuff, that they're interviewing people that can't answer basic questions and stuff. And they're like, there really is a lack of it. Even people sometimes with degrees, because I kind of mentioned the degree thing is a little funny in tech to me, because sometimes in the 4 years you're in school, stuff you were learning 3 years ago is out of date already, because it just moves so fast. I mean, especially over the last 20 years or so. So I get that there is, I've heard that side of it. I've heard that it's very hard to hire American workers, and they're just having better luck hiring foreign people. I've also heard the sort of flip of that. And so what I'm wondering, is there a better way to me, this feels like a decent compromise. The people that are complaining that, okay, maybe they're not getting paid enough, this is a total lottery system right now, right? They're essentially employers are applying. They have the specific people in mind, and then there's only like 85,000 that are going to get those work visas, right? Those H-1B visas. Mm-hmm. Would it be better to try to tie that to the dollar amount people are getting paid, or what's the trade-off there? Because it would seem like that would solve potentially the problem of people complaining that, oh, this is indentured servitude, or they're not getting paid enough, or they're getting paid less, and this is getting the companies off the hook. If you were prioritizing getting those H-1B visas based on a salary, like, oh, if someone's willing to spend $200,000 on someone, I would imagine Silicon Valley's already lifting that median wage up quite a bit compared to other areas in the country. But I mean, do you all see a downside in that potentially?
I think one of the problems. Go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, I think one consideration here that we should take into account is the fact that the process itself makes it so that it is more appealing to hire a U.S. worker than an immigrant H-1B worker because, right, you're going to have less paperwork to go through, less regulatory issues that you need to make sure you do properly. So I think, there is some balance here in the sense that I don't think companies are going around going, gee, it's our first option is to hire an H-1B employee. So I think that keeps it in favor of U.S. workers and helps to make it so that this is really more of a stopgap measure instead of our first choice is this less costly labor pool, right? And I understand that they are probably attracting a lower salary because they're less flexible. They can't leave that employer because of how the visa is structured. So I think it's important to recognize that there are benefits for U.S. workers and how the program is already designed. And it's hopefully working to fill the gap there. I think we should be asking, what is it that we need to do in the U.S. to address the labor shortage?
Yeah. I mean, that seems like the question number one, right? And that's why, to me, it seems foolish when we've got potentially labor shortage, especially in potentially this kind of STEM stuff this seems like not perfect. That's not the right word to say, but it does seem like a great way to say there's a lot of people complain about illegal immigration and the sort of broad brush painting that says they're coming here to benefit from the government kind of payouts and stuff like that, but not contributing anything to the economy. But obviously this is not the case there. We're literally saying This person has a job. They're getting paid quite a bit of money. They're paying taxes. They are buying houses probably because they're here for 3-6 years potentially. They're getting green cards after that potentially. These are all the things we want from someone when they come to this country, including the meritocracy that we hear so often about. We want to have the best people coming over. And it seems like this is doing that. This obviously no one's getting an H-1B visa and flipping hamburgers in McDonald's, I would assume.
No, there really is not. These jobs specifically are for people who are more qualified. And it's not all STEM, I believe, but the majority of them are STEM. Yeah. Now, that said, I think that you said something that's very true. I had it. Hold on a second. Shoot. You just said it, too. It was the last sentence right before the burger flipping thing,
like that basically being a merit kind of thing.
Oh, there we go. That's what it was. So, I think that when it comes to immigration, I think that there's a lot of proposals that we should be encouraging good immigration into the country. And I think the H-1B visas are the ones are sort of the model for this kind of thing. We need to be one of the things that Americans, we desperately need are doctors. We are doctors and nurses. There are shortages out there. And I mean, and even in between states, it's incredibly difficult for a doctor in California to go to Texas or to go to a different states because there's all this whole licensing issues. It's even worse for Americans. Let me tell you an example of my aunt. So my aunt went to school in UNAM, which is the best school in Latin America for nursing or just in general. She became a nurse and she was practicing for a while. She came to America sometime in the early 2000s. 2000s because she married an American citizen. She's over in Minnesota. And then she went back to Mexico when my grandma had cancer. This is in early 2000s. And she stayed there for about a year, took care of her. And then when she came back, even despite being a permanent resident, she found it incredibly difficult to actually get a job as a nurse. And in fact, some people said that her credentials didn't transfer anymore. So she actually had to go to school again. She got her degree here in America and became a nurse for a second time, despite the fact that she had been working in Mexico for a couple of years as a nurse, as a nurse. Now she's a nurse practitioner, I believe. And that takes a lot of time. And unfortunately, when you're going from, there's a lot of careers that we desperately need in America. And unfortunately, a lot of states and and especially the immigration laws, they make it incredibly difficult to either become a doctor or transfer, as well as make it difficult for doctors who want to come to America and who we desperately need to really come to America. So when it comes to the immigration system, we really need to prioritize those people who are be a benefit to the country. And I think H-1 visas or H-1B visas are a perfect example of where we're doing that.
Yeah. I also think, with restrictive policies, what you end up with is a slight decrease in illegal immigration. But, in this case, like what happens is you just have people who are working here and then they're not paying taxes, right? Like they are working remotely. They're doing any number of strategies, but it's not actually making them say, well, okay, I'm just not going to take advantage of this opportunity I see in the United States.
Right. And that's also, we're talking about different forms of immigration at that point, but that's also where if it's illegal to do so, that makes everyone that's working illegal, and they're going to try to hide from the system in that way, which is not good for anyone, right? It's not good for them. It's not good for the United States. It's not good for the tax base. It's not for any of that stuff. If you just make it all be sort of black market versions of what's going on. So to me, it makes sense to have this H-1B visa kind of stuff in the sense that, like I said, we can talk about, do we need to expand that number? Do we need to change the way that we approve and disapprove those? Because I would imagine that's probably where the bottleneck is, right? If we've got, let's say, 85,000 that get it and it's just a lottery system, obviously it would take a lot more government resources to do that based on merit or salary or any of those other kind of things. But it might also alleviate some of the concerns, although my sort of opinion is both of the extreme sides saying their sort of rhetoric of, oh, this is taking advantage of them, or this is really hurting the American workers. Because you mentioned, Laura, that like, you're right, it would be much easier for a company to hire an American than it is to go through the H-1B process.
Right. So
to me, both those sides are being a little bit hyperbolic probably in saying that like this is the worst kind of thing ever. And obviously I feel like no one was mentioning H-1B visas at all. This is something that has not been reformed since 2004. Is that right? That's the last time Congress did anything about H-1B visas. So it does seem like it's probably time. It's been over 20 years since they've changed anything. And I would imagine immigration looks significantly different than it did in 2004. Do you all have any dream things that you would like to see changed about it? If Congress took it up, now that it is something that's a topic of conversation, at least within some of the Trump world?
I think, and I'm not sure if this is going to be the case, but I think expanding such a program would actually be very beneficial, especially, President Trump was just inaugurated, not long ago. And one of the things that it was pretty exciting, he said, like, we're going to Mars. And like, that reminded me of JFK. Now, I wasn't alive for JFK, but it evoked that feeling of like, yeah, let's go to Mars. But, like, how did we get to the moon in the first place? Well, we had a bunch of scientists from Germany, that's how we did it. There's a lot that we need to find the best and brightest around the world and bring them here to work for the best country in the world. That's just a match made in heaven, if you will. The only way we're going to get to Mars is if we expand programs like H-1 visas that attract qualified scientists that are going to help us get there, whether it be through NASA or whether it be through SpaceX or whatever. We need more qualified immigrants to come to America to expand the frontier on space.
Yeah. And I also want to add to that like, we aren't convincing them to come to the U.S. We don't have to recruit them and persuade them to come here. They want to come here, not just because it is a free and flourishing society, but because the economic productivity of the United States is such that the value of your talent in this country compared to other countries is higher. Like, that's extraordinary. It attracts incredibly talented people from all over the world. And, trying to shut them out is kind of, it's like a fool's errand, right? Like, instead of trying to get water to flow uphill, why don't we harness this incredible opportunity we have, harness their talents and the fact that they want to come here and live an American dream like the rest of us do.
Not only that, but one of the things that ends up happening is that there is a self-selection bias when it comes to the people who are actually coming here. One of the reasons why immigrants are so entrepreneurial isn't necessarily because, say, for example, Mexico has a culture of entrepreneurship, or maybe some Asian countries. There is some truth to that, but the fact that they left their country to come to America shows you the exact type of person that they are. If somebody is willing to drop their just everything from Mexico, kind of like my parents did, or drop from even in Asia, which is way further than Mexico, they're willing to drop everything and risk everything to come to America. That's the type of people that we need to be encouraging to come into the country, because they are really seeking their American dream, and they can really be a benefit to the country.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, and in fact, I think that goes back all the way to the people that came here originally. I mean, before we were even a country. I think it's we're kind of a nation of second sons, like people that didn't get the inheritance and then made it, went off on their own and had to do something, And I feel like that spirit of someone wanting to come here and be better off economically, not just by way of, America's richer than other countries, but no, I want to go work hard. I want to start a business. I want to do that stuff. Why are we doing anything to fast track H-1B visa people through citizenship? Because it seems like they're the right people. They want to be here. They want to have high paying jobs, and they're qualified for those high paying jobs. I mean, in my opinion, I don't want them to be H-1B visa holders or green card holders. I want those kind of people to be citizens quicker than, not to put this in that way, but there's a significant difference between that person that's coming here because they're like, I think I have the wherewithal to be able to make it in America and be one of those people that has the 44% of the Fortune 500 companies, or their kids potentially have those companies. It's not that I don't also have a soft spot for refugees from, they're fleeing Venezuela right now with all that madness. But I mean, there is a difference between those two groups of people. I mean, just there is, and so I don't understand why we wouldn't be encouraging citizenship for H-1B visa holders. And is that something we could change more?
There definitely is a path. And I mean, it gets a little technical, but I believe that in order for you to be eligible for a green card as an H-1B visa, you have to have had it for at least 3 years. And then after that, once you become a green card holder, I believe you have to have it for about 5 years. It's a long process. It really is, it takes a long time. Let's just put it that way.
And in my, I'm all for there being a process. It just, to me, seems like when people are specifically wanting to come here, they're wanting to work, they're wanting to start businesses, they're wanting to start families here. It just seems like, let's get that going as fast as possible. I realize we have all sorts of immigration problems in the United States as far as we do not have the judges, we do not have the asylum kind of thing. We don't have all the stuff in place to be able to deal with the amount of people that are coming in, but it does seem worthwhile to do that because I would rather have, frankly, this is maybe unpopular to say, but it sounds like you're right. People are fighting to get in and get one of those H-1B visas. And meanwhile, frankly, half of my generation is unemployed for no reason. I mean, I prefer the hard work of the people trying to come here and get jobs almost over the American citizens that are not willing to contribute to the economy. I know that sounds harsh maybe, but am I being overly critical of the American workforce and saying that they're not filling those gaps?
It's funny, especially because one of these things that you're saying right now, you're kind of paraphrasing a little bit, or at least evoking what Vivek and Elon were saying. And, there was a lot of people who were very much there was a lot of people on the right who were saying like, oh, you can't criticize America, and all these things. And I get that. It definitely strings some feelings because at the end of the day, even our poor people are richer than like other poor people's countries. Even our lazy are definitely better than some lazy people's like elsewhere. But it's really all about incentives. And unfortunately, for the last several decades, the American education system has been incentivizing really bad degrees. I used to always point to the classes over at Arizona State University on lesbian class theory or dance theory. And, you have these things and you have like, I have a worthless degree, like a bachelor degree, and I did it because it was free. Like I didn't pay for it and stuff, but I ended up getting a degree on social justice. And I took those classes, one, because it was free, and two, because I found them interesting, but I would never pay for a degree like that. And unfortunately, the government itself, like they make it really easy to get these classes. And you have, courses, inflation, not just in like monetary value of this, that the degrees themselves are worthless, but the classes themselves are studying niche topics that don't translate to the real world. So when you're looking at this, the fact that the vast majority of Americans graduating with a degree tend to be in not the STEM fields, but in the humanities, and the humanities are incredibly important. But the fact that the government gives money to what do they call it? Subsidize this types of educations, like it makes it so Americans, it's not necessarily that Americans are lazy. It's just that they're being underserved by the college system itself. They're being encouraged to study things that are not going to translate to the jobs that H-1B visas would have. If you got rid of a lot of that, like those subsidies in higher education, then you would actually see a lot of college students buckle down because they realize, oh, I actually have to pay for if I want to get a lesbian dance theory degree, instead of just giving the money or getting the money from the government. And that would shift the priorities towards more of the STEM fields. It's not that the American work ethic is bad, it's that we have the wrong incentives in place.
Yeah, I think that's right. One interesting thing about that, in looking up some research on this and stuff, is that I found that like 80% of graduate students in computer science in U.S. universities are foreign born, which it seems like a very high number. My question on that, and we don't have to know the answer to this, but it's just an interesting, at least thought kind of thing, is like, is that because U.S. students are not interested in getting graduate degrees in computer science stuff? Is it because colleges would rather accept a foreign student because they're paying the full price and American students might not be? So like, there's probably some incentives there too that need to be looked at, because I can see why, if it is because colleges would rather take the full money than the scholar, they got to give the in-state guy, he doesn't have to pay as much as someone that's coming from India or China or something. That would be something where I'd go, okay, we've got maybe some incentives messed up there for American students, but it's still like they probably can't account for all 80% of that. That's a pretty high. No,
certainly. But I will say, when it comes to foreign people coming to America to our universities, I don't have the numbers for this, but I'm willing to bet that those people that have to pay full sticker price for the university, they're not going to pay again in the humanities. They're likely going to go into more of the STEM fields, because for them, their incentive is what's going to be my return, my investment for an American education. Right. So then they are more willing to go to that, some of those more STEM fields, or maybe even like some of the more things like even within the humanities, there's still things that are very good, like psychology, that's kind of on the border of like science and humanities, especially if you go more into like towards the medical side. But nonetheless, some of the more serious humanities, if you will, not arts necessarily, but we're incentivizing for foreign people to come to America. The incentives are for them to take classes that are harder because they get a bigger incentive. Meanwhile, Americans are incentivized to take the easy way out because it's often free or it's just very low cost to them.
Well, I think there's also a difference in how Americans and foreigners look at college. I think, unfortunately, a lot of Americans look at it as extended adolescence. It's like part two of high school. And that's, in my experience with, especially in high school, with anyone whose parents were first generation immigrants, they were like Yeah, my neighbor across the street is like is a PA, and he's like, he's Asian. He's like, my parents are disappointed in me. I mean, it's like,
Wow.
not really, but he's like, it's kind of a joke. It's like, if you're not a lawyer or a doctor, what have we come here for? And so, but I mean, it's like they were serious about, no, you are studying. Like, it's not about you. Like, and to me, there's just a difference between, I mean, obviously, I think a first generation immigrant, especially, here in Oklahoma, a lot of Vietnamese that came during, the 60s and the 70s during Vietnam. And, they have a totally different outlook on life and what they want for their kids. And they're kind of hedging against their kid not being poor. That's essentially what they do not want what they grew up with. And I think that we're a little, kind of Americans.
Well, in America, we're letting, like, we're asking 18-year-olds. I think the average cost of college tuition is like $30,000 a year now. And so we're asking an 18-year-old, how would you like to spend 120 grand of education? Like, what, go for it. And I'll tell you, as an 18-year-old, I wasn't making smart financial decisions, especially not $120,000 ones. So I just think there's probably a lot of really complex interrelated things that are going into this shortage. I mean, I'm sure some of it is probably also, elementary and middle and high school preparation for these classes.
Absolutely.
And maybe we need to be making different investments so that kids going into college are better prepared for this higher education. But I think trying to solve it by just clamping down on H-1Bs is like a really short-sighted way of addressing the issue.
I also just think that when you look at the economic outlook of what, for anyone that's trying to look into the future, it's pretty obvious that we are economically and technologically competing with China. That's the competition. So should we be the country that lets everyone else from around the world come here and potentially help us have an edge, whereas China is less likely to do that just based on the way they look at, immigration. And I mean, even within the country, the sort of racism that goes on as far as, oh, these are the real Chinese people. These are not, it's like, to me, that gives us an edge. If we say, I want the smartest people from India, I want the smartest people from China, from Vietnam, from South Korea, from Japan. I want those people here, and I want to be developing that technology here. I want us to have that edge against them. To me, it makes a lot of sense. I get that there's a lot of minutia and nuance that goes in to this policy that we can fight about. But when people just dismiss it out of hand, I just feel like I've not seen a convincing argument so far that we should just ditch this. I mean, have you all been more persuaded by specific concerns that we maybe haven't brought up yet?
I think one thing we haven't talked about it's not a concern against H-1Bs, it's a concern in favor. As we're starting to talk about declining birth rates, I think we have no idea what it's going to look like when we start to see these like bigger gaps in the labor market. I think it could shake out in some really unpredictable and unexpected ways. I'm not an expert in demographics or anything like that, or labor markets, or immigration policy, to be totally clear. But I think that could have some really surprising ramifications and really catch us out short. And I think that allowing legal immigration is one hedge against that, because it takes years to educate somebody or to increase the birth rate, right? Like that's not a solution that's available to us here in the short term, as we're looking at, a pretty significant labor gap as soon as 2030.
I feel like we have a slightly different problem in America, in the sense that in like Japan and China, they're getting that sort of upside down Christmas tree where they're just not, they don't have enough kids. Basically, they don't have enough people that could be in the labor market. I feel like ours, we're having some of that for sure as the birth rate has declined, but we also just have quite a few people that aren't in the labor force. And so it does seem like something we can go, oh, this is a wake up call. Like, this is what could happen. But we actually still have a lot of those people there. It is about like, do we need to educate them more? Do we I feel like we could potentially come out of it better. Like, I guess that's the silver lining in it. It's like some of these people are just not participating in the labor force for whatever reason. There's a lot of different reasons, obviously, But it's like we have to have those jobs. Doctors is a great thing that you brought up, Gabe. It's like that's something I've been very interested in for a while, is how that doctor shortage is going to hit us like a truck when all of the boomer generation retires, which they are already. And we already have these doctor shortages. It's like we're either going to have to bring doctors in from out of the country, or we're going to have to change the way we train doctors in America. There are only two options, or we're not going to have enough doctors. And that's just one very specific group of employees in the United States, but that's also going to happen for things that maybe don't have as much of a visual thing. And so maybe that's a way to do it, is like take the people that actually, because we all interact with doctors. Everyone has medical stuff that they have to deal with. We don't all interact with coders because, they're dorks like me and they hang out in the room, and they'd rather do that than hang out with people sometimes. I know that's a stereotype, but sometimes it works. You got to be smart to be a coder, not chase girls and play guitars and stuff like that. Like what I do. Or did. I've only chased one girl for 19 years. But, I just wonder, is that maybe a way to, because I feel like the main problem is that we're just not talking about this stuff. We just shout about immigration and we want to stop immigration without really thinking about if every immigrant disappeared, if you could like snap your fingers and make that happen. I don't think people understand the economic repercussions of what that would do to the country until they actually see it. So do you think what do you think the best way is for people to be educated about this, whether it's via pain, because that seems to be the thing that actually does snap us into action, is, oh no, there's pain coming, or it's here, and then we're all up in arms about stuff. But I mean, what do you think the key is to explaining why this is beneficial, or even just like to have the conversation about like what it does, and not even trying to pick a side, just literally saying, here's how it works, here's why it needs to happen. How do you think we have that conversation going forward?
I mean, I think sorry to cut you off, Gabe. I was going to say, I think like one thing that's actually invaluable is I wish more people had awareness of like what Gabe went through with his citizenship issues, because I feel like a lot of people debating immigration issues have this idea that actually there's a very easy legal way to just come into the country, and that the people who aren't following it, it's because they're bad people who like breaking the law. No, it is an incredibly tricky system. I think probably a large percentage of the people going through require legal assistance, right? Like you need a lawyer working with you to get through this process. It's expensive. It's time consuming. We're making it incredibly hard. And I wish more people understood the difficulty of that, because I feel like that would maybe help them understand a little bit better, like that these people who are seeking to enter the United States are, they're fleeing really difficult situations. They're highly motivated to come here because of economic opportunity and growing businesses, but just kind of understand a little bit more what that experience is like, and like why we need to address it.
That's good.
I definitely think that Lura is onto something. One of the things that we do at Our America is that we highlight different people who we believe are great Americans. And there's multiple different immigrant stories there of just people who come here with nothing and then and make something of themselves. That's a truly inspiring way of telling America, or showing Americans of like what they can really, what an immigrant's life can really be in America. But I think another one, specifically with the H-1B visas, I think that you just gotta show them cool stuff. Like legitimately, I think that the whole Mars thing is a great opportunity to show the benefits of H-1 visas, B visas, and like just immigration itself, because there's going to be a lot of immigrants who are working on these projects, again, whether it be through SpaceX or through NASA or whatever, and you got to show them that this was possible because we were an inclusive country that invited the best and brightest to come to America so they can pursue and promote, not just pursue the American dream for themselves, but make it possible for others as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think what bothers me the most about how the right is talking about this right now, and the reason my thing is called the homeless conservative, is because so many of my values, I just feel like, have been thrown out the window by today's Republican Party. But one of my biggest complaints is they go, okay, we don't want people pouring over the border. We want there to be merit for immigration, but then they also crap on H-1B visas. And I go, okay, well then, what? I mean, if that's not meritorious enough. And I'm not saying you can't look at the things and make sure. I mean, I know there are situations. I'm confident, like any government program, there are companies that have taken advantage of it and done the wrong thing with it. I'm sure that happens, just like every other thing the government does. There are going to be people that are bad actors. I just think that there's no way you can hold that opinion of saying, oh, we want there to be merit-based. We want the best and the brightest, which is what Trump has said over and over again. But then potentially to say, oh, no, but we want to stop this program because it might be hurting American workers, without looking at the big picture of, is it really hurting America's economy and workers? Maybe Americans, it's not a zero-sum game, as we talked about earlier. Just because you don't get that job doesn't mean that job doesn't create another job potentially, or that company doesn't create another job that you do have. We're all better off if we have more workers, if we have better economy. I just wish more people understood the repercussions, the ripple effect of these things.
Yeah. I think when you're looking for a job and you're struggling to find work, I definitely understand being swayed by the argument of like, hey, these people are coming in taking jobs, right? And I'm sure it does feel like a zero-sum game at that point. But I think it's hard to even imagine like the ripple effects of what skilled immigrants have coming into the US, right? Because they start businesses, but they also do things like, they buy cars, they put gas in their car, they go to the dry cleaner, they eat out at restaurants, right? Like it's hard to even imagine the rippling effects that they have on our economy. They pay taxes, right? Like there's a tremendous benefit there. And, it would be really helpful, I think, to the debate on both sides to kind of stop like caricaturing the other side, right? Like this is not a matter of like, I don't want to call the right like xenophobic for being opposed to immigration, right? And I don't want like the left is saying that they're xenophobic, and on the right they're saying, well, they just open the borders. I feel like the starting place is really to say like, okay, what is available to us if we harness legal immigration effectively, and how many people can we bring in? How many people do we need? And that's a complicated question, but we can absolutely study that and come up with more accurate numbers for what the potential is for growth.
And then hopefully get Congress to look further down than 1 year down the road so that we can maybe do some of that stuff.
That's my real question is like, how do you change the time horizon that members of Congress are looking at?
Yeah, that is a much harder question to answer. And I would if you find the answer to that, please come back on because we need to know how to fix that problem. Because I think that is the short-sightedness of everything lately just feels, and maybe it's always been that way, but it's hard to know because I'm 41 years old. So it's hard to, I wasn't around when Kennedy said, let's go to the moon, and we did it. That seems crazy to me now. It just doesn't, like, even Trump saying, let's go to Mars feels like, all right, sure, but it's going to be a private company that does it. I don't think any way the government is going to get us there right now. It just doesn't feel like we have a moonshot. It doesn't feel like we can think further than a couple weeks down the road or to the next election. So that would be great. If we can solve that, you all let me know. Well, thank you both for coming on so much. I really do appreciate you coming and having this conversation about visas, wonky stuff like immigration visas. But I think it's important stuff to talk about, especially as there is infighting in the MAGA crowd currently about it. It seems topical. And so I thank you all for both coming on.
Of course, yeah. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Lura and Gabriel for coming on. Please check out independencenter.org and joinouramerica.org, both of which will be linked in the show notes below. And check out Gabriel's book, Behind the Black Mask, about his time as an Antifa activist before being turned on to classical liberal economists like Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell. If you can do one thing for me, please rate the show wherever you listen. It's real easy. You can just give it maximum stars and don't even have to write a thing if you don't want to. If you can do two things, share a short or a reel on YouTube or Instagram with someone you think might enjoy it. It really helps me a lot. That's it for this week. I will catch you next time.